Three people went exploring the deepest cave in the UK. Unfortunately, one of them fell from a great height, and rocks that tumbled down after him struck him repeatedly. As a result, his face was smashed through, and he suffered more than a dozen compound fractures all over his body. His life was hanging by a thread. But the worst part was, he was trapped nearly 100 meters deep inside the cave. The way out was either through narrow passages where you could only crawl, or through raging underground rivers, waterfalls, and cliffs. No matter how you looked at it, it seemed impossible for him to survive. But the rescuers didn't give up, and so the longest cave rescue operation in British history began. This is the story we're talking about today, the Black Spring Cave incident in Wales. Black Spring Cave is located in the upper reaches of the Swansea Valley in Wales, UK. The cave entrance looks pretty unremarkable, but beneath it lies a nerve-wracking network of underground passages. This makes Black Spring Cave the third longest and the deepest cave in the UK. The cave was discovered in 1946 by the South Wales Caving Club. It mainly has three entrances: the bottom entrance, the Water Valley entrance, and the top entrance. The latter two entrances are managed by the South Wales Caving Club. The club's headquarters is built right above the cave, very close to the Water Valley entrance. To its north is a Victorian-era abandoned quarry. Black Spring Cave is 59 kilometers long, dropping 274.5 meters at its deepest. It offers diverse landscapes, narrow passages, cliffs, rifts, rivers, pools, waterfalls, and stone pillars. In addition, the waters inside the cave are home to a large number of fish, shrimp, and plankton. Because of this, ever since Black Spring Cave was discovered, it has continuously attracted numerous cave exploration enthusiasts. On the morning of November 6, 2021, three people also came here. They were George Linnan, 38 years old, an engineer and director at an automation services company, Melissa Bell, a project manager at a charitable organization, and Mark Burge, a very well-known cave photographer. To make things easier to understand, I've simplified the cave map here. Their plan was to enter through the middle entrance, explore for a while, then follow the underground river through the Marble Forest area, the Big Crocodile Lake area, the Ballpark Passage, and finally exit from the top entrance. The whole journey was expected to take about 5 or 6 hours. At 9:15 a.m., the three of them arrived at the Middle CWMDR entrance. I'm not really sure how to pronounce this since it doesn't mean anything in English, but in Welsh it means Water Valley, so the area below this entrance is also called the Water Valley section. The reason the three chose this spot is because right after entering there's a downward circular passage. The passage is extremely narrow, only allowing one person to slowly slide down at a time, which is why it's also called the chute. Coming out of this winding passage feels like being reborn. Except here, your feet come out first. 20 minutes later, the three of them entered the Jama section from the chute. The space here was still narrow, but the passage became flat and there was standing water on the ground, making it even harder to get through than the chute. Yet 10 minutes later, the three of them entered an area called the greenhouse, where the passage is wider and you can walk upright. The place they're heading to is called the Smith Space. There are 2 Smith spaces in total, Upper Smith and Lower Smith. Most people go to Lower Smith because it's right next to the main passage and the path is easier to walk. The three of them also came here first, but then they decided to take a detour to check out the Upper Smith area. When they arrived, they took some photos there. The pictures you see were taken at that time. After that, the three of them got ready to head back to the main passage. This stretch of road is a typical fracture zone, and the three of them had no idea that danger was waiting for them just ahead. The rocks beneath their feet had all fallen during the cave collapse. They looked solid, but in reality, some spots were hollow underneath. The rocks were just barely wedged into the cracks. At that time, Mark was walking in front, Melissa was in the middle, and George was at the back. After walking for just 5 minutes, the rock under George's feet suddenly gave way and he fell down with it. When he hit the bottom of the cave, the disaster wasn't over yet, because the rocks above, now unsupported, kept falling, and one of them landed right on George's face. He didn't even have time to call out before he passed out. Hearing the commotion, Melissa quickly turned around and saw a hole about 1.7 meters in diameter in the ground, with George lying motionless below. There was about a 9-meter drop between him and Melissa, which is like falling from the height of a 3-story building and then getting hit by rocks a few more times. Melissa called out to George loudly, but George didn't respond at all. Mark heard her and turned back as well. Then he used a rope to go down and check on him. At that moment, George regained consciousness, but aside from groaning, he couldn't say a word. Mark saw that George was seriously injured, so he told Melissa to stay with George while he climbed out of the cave to call for help. Fortunately, the headquarters of the South Wales Caving Club was nearby, and they also had a professional cave rescue team and equipment. In fact, even if you called the police, they would end up asking the club for help anyway. After listening to Mark's account, the club immediately sent several people over to check things out. At the same time, they also put out a call for support to other cavers in their network. 3 hours after George's fall, the first rescue team finally reached him. In addition to some medication and basic rescue gear, they also brought a system called CaveLink. This device allows signals to pass through solid rock, so people inside and outside the cave can communicate via text messages. The rescuers began to assess George's condition and found that his face had a large gash, most of his teeth were knocked out, his lower leg was deformed, and he had at least 10 broken bones. There was also a noticeable collapse in his chest, which meant he likely had internal injuries as well, so it was critical to get him to a hospital as soon as possible. Before the doctor arrived, they gave George injections for pain relief and to help his blood clot. At the same time, the rescue command team was already working on a rescue plan. The command center was set up at the headquarters of the South Wales Club. The first challenge they faced was deciding from where to bring George out. Although the closest exit to George was the Water Valley entrance in the middle section, which was also where they had entered. But as everyone saw earlier, the passage over there, whether it's the birth canal or the squeeze area, is extremely narrow, and since a stretcher is needed to carry George out, there's just no way to get through that way. Going out through the bottom entrance wasn't an option either because the structure there is even more complicated. So in the end, everyone decided to bring George out through the top entrance. Although this route is longer, about 3.44 kilometers in total, the passage is relatively wide, so theoretically they could carry the stretcher through. At this point, 260 caving enthusiasts from all over the UK, along with medical personnel experienced in caving, also arrived one after another. Many of these people had participated in the Thai cave rescue, and they planned to enter the cave in 2 alternating shifts. After the doctors stabilized George, they wrapped him in a sleeping bag and then secured him to the stretcher. It took him a full 7 hours just to get George to the main passage. To prevent his body temperature from dropping too low, they set up several insulated tents along the way, and it took almost another 8 hours to get him out of the boulder zone. The next 2 kilometers involved moving upstream along an underground river. Some passages were tall and narrow, others had fast-flowing water, and there were even stepped waterfalls. To keep George from falling into the water, they tied umbilical cords all around the stretcher. In some sections, rescuers even lay in the water to support the stretcher. After walking like this for 9 hours, they entered the most challenging part of the entire route, the vertical passage section. Some of the cliffs here have a drop of up to 18 meters, which is about the height of a 6-story building. So to go up, they had to use a rope system, with one person on each side of the stretcher for protection. When they encountered narrow areas, they had to switch to having one person above and one below. At this point, if there were falling rocks or if the rope snaps, it would be extremely dangerous. So it took them 12 hours to cover less than a kilometer of this passage. Once they entered the horizontal section, the path became much easier, but in some areas they couldn't walk upright. The final stretch took almost another 7 hours. On the night of November 8th, 2021, John was finally brought near the top entrance. This part of the passage was more spacious, and over 100 people lined both sides to build a walkway for John. They passed John along in a relay, each person smiling and greeting him, or cracking a joke or two. Once he was out of the cave, John was immediately taken to the hospital. With that, this grueling rescue operation finally came to an end, taking a total of about 57 hours. This surpassed the Mossdale Caverns rescue of 1967, becoming the longest, most challenging, and stretcher-carrying rescue operation in British history. And after a period of treatment, John basically made a full recovery. In addition to having his face pierced and losing most of his teeth, he suffered severe fractures to his spine, fibula, tibia, sternum, wrist, collarbone, and jawbone, some of which were even completely detached. He also had internal injuries like a collapsed lung and a torn spleen. The fact that he survived all this is truly a miracle. So, to thank his fellow cavers for saving him, George later joined the South Wales Club's rescue team. From then on, just as others had rescued him, he began providing rescue assistance to others. Alright, that's the end of this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time.